Center in 2016.
Started down. Sorry.
Okay, is starting.
Yeah.
In any case, I was telling the story of me meeting Anna, so we didn't lose much in not recording this part. But we met some years ago at the Integrado Center, also thanks to Jim Jasper, who is following now in the audience, in the virtual audience, and so I'm very happy that now you're here and presenting the book. You were still working on your PhD dissertation, and now finally there is this amazing result that we are discussing today. And so just a few words introducing Anna. Anna, she's a sociologist. She's also a writer and an educator and interested in cities and politics. Two small issues. And she defended her PhD dissertation at the Integrado Center of the City University of New York, and she worked in the last years as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Helsinki, and after she joined Utrecht University as an assistant professor in 2023, and she's an assistant professor of interdisciplinary social sciences. In 2026, she started a new project. So just started. So in this initial month of 2026, ERC funded project. Congratulations on strategic care in activism, mental health across scales of social change, which short title is Care to Act. Very nice title, by the way. And her work has been featured in different journals, such as Social Problems, Sociology, City and Community, and many others. She has also a book co-authored also with Jim Jasper and another author, I think, but
there's like five more.
Five more, but so I will not mention all of them, just the present, because it's not getting too long. About gains and losses, how protesters win and lose, published by Oxford University Press. And so today she's presenting and she's discussing with us a new book, Private Life, Public Action, which was published by Temple University Press in 2025. Which explores how housing issues mobilize urban residents. So I give you the floor, Anna, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So is this one now?
Can we go full screen?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much.
You can maybe reduce these.
We can keep them.
Yeah, as you want. You can give your water.
Yes, thanks, Guya, for this introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. You said you would introduce me very briefly, and that was very detailed, I think. Yeah, indeed, I would like to talk about my new book today. It is based on a dissertation, and it pains me to admit how long it took me to turn this dissertation into a book, but I'm very proud of this achievement. And you will see how long it actually took. Because I'll talk about my project when it started, and you'll see how long this was in the making. But there's also a reason why it took so long, and I'll also get into that in a minute. This is the cover of my book and the title of the book. But I would like to show you another picture before I say anything about the project and about the book. Oops, sorry. No problem. Should I admit people? There are people waiting to be admitted. Okay.
We're taking care of that.
All right, good. So what you see here is I can hear myself. Is that yeah? Okay. So what you see here is a picture of one of the biggest rallies in Moscow. The picture was taken in 2017. So that was one of the biggest protest demonstrations in decades, actually. And the protest shows everyone who went to the streets to protest a new urban renewal project that was announced that year in Moscow. And I thought I'd show you this just to demonstrate how many different topics came together. So you can't read it now, I'm assuming, because everything is in Russian. So I have those very fancy translations, if they work. Yes, there we go. So this banner, the red one, shows that the Akademichesky district, this is just the name of a neighborhood, is strongly against the renovation bill. That was a new proposal, a new kind of legislative initiative going through the motions of Moscow's politics that was supposed to enable this urban renewal project. So those Muscovites are against it. Then you have another neighborhood that's against it. Then you have something rather different. Tsaritsino is also a neighborhood, but this neighborhood demands that particular housing complex that was a very long time in the making, that it be finished. So does not relate to renovation directly. Then we have something that just expresses love for Moscow, for the city where this is all taking place. Just someone is walking around with a banner saying, "Love, Moscow is my love." Then we have something that maybe I heard from Guya that there might be political scientists in the room. This is something for political scientists. Shows you that some political parties also joined this demonstration. And this is one of the oppositionist parties at the time that also walks around in this demonstration with their banners. And finally, another district, another neighborhood in the back there, demanding that the property rights of Muscovites are defended. So you see how many different things are actually happening at this rally. There's people opposing a particular initiative, an urban redevelopment initiative. There are people expressing love for Moscow. There are people just demanding that a housing complex is completed. Also political parties, so all kinds of things are happening. And that kind of gives you a snapshot of what this protest looked like, how all-inclusive and actually quite big it was. But here's another bit of information that you need to read this picture. So the renovation project, which my book and my dissertation are about, is a massive, really unprecedented in scale proposal to demolish Soviet-era housing across Moscow. And most of the Muscovites, the residents of Moscow, they actually live in buildings that were constructed around that time, so sometime after the Second World War. And you can see also on this map where those buildings are located, where those areas are located. And you can see that some neighborhoods were basically, to be demolished completely in their entirety. And to give you an idea of scale, so Moscow, just what you're looking at right now is more or less the size of London or Paris, if you can imagine those cities. So it's a really big area, and some of those neighborhoods are just massive in size. So those demolitions were really indeed great in scale. And this proposal, as I mentioned, was first announced in 2017, and they started implementing it almost immediately. And the idea was that people who lived at the time in those Soviet-era residential buildings, that they would be relocated to new high-rises. So basically new housing would be built and people would move to those new areas. But these high-rises did not exist at the time. So it was really not clear where those new homes would be, what quality they would be, and really a lot of uncertainty was involved in this promise. But to add to the scale of the proposal, again, almost all of Moscow was affected. So the city has 146 administrative units, so those municipal districts, and 122 of those were affected by renovation. So there was something that some buildings that were included in this proposal. And as you have seen in the previous photo in the picture, there was a new bill, a new law introduced to enable this process, because residential buildings in Moscow, it's usually a mix of property rights of tenure types. So there are social renters, commercial renters, or kind of the market renters, and property owners living together. And this it creates an administrative impasse if you want to relocate people. So to enable kind of this massive and quick relocation, a new legislation was designed and introduced in 2017. Also, according to this new legislation, the residents of those apartment buildings, and those are usually large apartment buildings with multiple apartments, sometimes more than 100 apartments in every single building, they were invited to vote. And I use quotation marks here because this is not really a voting procedure, but this was more like a digital instrument to collect the opinions of people, whether they wanted to be relocated, whether they wanted their building to be included in this program or not. So there was an element of democracy there, which the city administration was really proud of. So this is what created the foundation. Like this is the situation where this protest really emerged from. And I do urge you to ask questions. If there's something that is not clear about this renovation proposal, please ask me, because I might miss bits of information. Yeah.
What was the problem was meant to be?
That's a very good question, but there were multiple things that this project was trying to do. So first of all, Moscow is a very attractive city for real estate development. And as you can see, those areas are actually in kind of nice, accessible areas of Moscow. So they are well developed. There's a lot of infrastructure, but those buildings from the Soviet times, they are seen as inefficient, because they take too much space, there's too much greenery, and you can't really develop and sell it. So they kind of, for the city, that was a way to make the real estate process a bit more efficient and more profitable. But they also sold it as a project to improve the housing conditions of those people, of course, because these buildings, those apartment buildings, were slowly deteriorating, and it was difficult to repair them as well. Difficult, or just no one had the political will or money to do so. So there were multiple processes that really gave the idea to the Moscow administration. Is there anything else that I should clarify? Because I've been like talking about renovation for so long now that I might be missing bits of information. And like I said, please ask me if something's unclear. But again, I leave it this. The one picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'll show you on the left. This is what these buildings look like. So as you see, they're often five stories high. They are kind of designed, like the whole micro district is designed very carefully. They have green areas, public spaces, social infrastructure of all kinds, and it's actually quite nice. When you look at it with all the trees, it can look very nice, but the buildings themselves, they have this really characteristic aesthetic of Soviet era architecture. They are quite they all look alike often. They're not built of very interesting, beautiful materials, so they don't often they don't look that well. And on the right, you see a rendering of the proposal for a new district that would replace the Soviet era housing, and this is what they imagine it as. You can see that there's much less green space, the buildings are taller, and they follow this kind of new aesthetic of urban architecture. So that's the supposed change, but also at the time in 2017, like I said, these areas where people would supposedly move to, they didn't exist. So that was a lot to process in terms of uncertainty. Another picture. So as you can imagine, neighbors in those buildings that were considered for inclusion in this urban renewal proposal had different opinions about this prospect. Some people were terrified, others were actually quite happy about this opportunity, because the apartments in those buildings can be a bit small, for example, for the size of the families that are living there, and some people hoped that they would get a better deal out of this process. But also these buildings are considered not of great quality, and also some neighbors were happy to improve the quality of their building. So here's a person standing in front of his building with a sign calling to stop for like actual action and demolition, instead of all the deliberation and discussion that took place in 2017. So imagine the situation. You live in a building and there are neighbors who really want this building to be demolished, and others who really want to stay where they are. And all these people had to basically vote and make a decision on the fate of their apartment building together. And that created a very difficult, complex, and it created a lot of tension between the neighbors. People started mobilizing, of course, in response to this proposal, and they started mobilizing on both sides. So there was a mobilization among neighbors trying to make sure that their building would be included in the program. So they wanted to, they advocated for their neighbors to vote in favor of the proposal of the renovation. And there was an opposing mobilization often in the same building, trying to stop the demolitions and trying to make sure that this building stays put. So at the building level, that created a lot of tension, like I said, among the neighbors. But there was also neighborhood level organizing taking place. And usually that was the organizing of the opponents of renovation. Because very quickly, people started organizing, sharing information at the neighborhood and at the city level, actually, to coordinate action and to make sure that whole districts could be saved. So not just individual buildings, but also neighborhoods with their unique atmosphere, with their cozy kind of layout and social infrastructure. So at the neighborhood level, what I mostly found is that opponents were quite active, but the supporters of renovation were mostly active in their building, because they were trying to make sure that they can move. And there was, of course, a mobilization at the city level, trying to push for this legislation to be stopped or amended and modified to make sure that the rights of the potential relocatees, if that's even the word, that they are protected. So as you can see, there was this multi-level political process taking place. Any questions about yeah?
Since we are talking about grassroots movements and like developers' wills, were that documented any type of astroturfing, like in such protests?
Yeah, there was actually quite a bit of propaganda and just shady activities going on at the neighborhood level from the local and the city administrations, trying to make sure that these buildings actually vote the way they want them to vote. I'm not going to focus too much on that, but I do focus on that in the book. So thank you for the question. You can definitely find that there, because it's a very complex process, lots of emotions and a lot of different interests involved in it, of course. Any other questions about renovation? Because I'm now going to go into my conceptual stuff, if that's okay. But yeah, feel free to ask any clarification questions about the actual proposal if necessary. So why is it interesting? I can talk for hours just about what happened and what this project involved and the neighborhoods and Moscow as kind of just the empirical reality of this whole thing. But I do think that there's quite a lot this particular story can tell us about just kind of urban politics, authoritarian urbanism, and how grassroots movements work in urban contexts with low political trust and social trust. And this is why I think that's actually interesting also for scholars working outside of this post-socialist or outside of Russia even. But there's one important feature of Russian civil society, of Moscow's urban civil society, is kind of this idea that these civil societies are often weak, and again quotation marks here because I don't fully agree with this characterization, but you can find it a lot in the literature that those post-socialist civil societies are seen as weak, not very organized. They don't have these kind of stable organizational infrastructures. And to add to that, there's also the problem of political apathy that is kind of this cultural practice that really affects how people engage or do not engage with anything political, anything that has to do with collective action. And in this case, so this is indeed kind of the culture of the place of Moscow, that people really had often had no experience with political action and with organizing. And many of the people I spoke to as part of this project, it was their first experience of doing something outside of their kind of private domain, outside of their individual lives. And what I found interesting here is that actually housing is a very strong catalyst of this political action because of the nature of housing as this kind of very private matter, but which is also a very public matter, because there are usually different institutions and governmental bodies, policies involved in housing and how people live and what housing looks like, and so on and so forth. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But so to kind of wrap up this thought, even in countries in contexts where you have all this political apathy, civil societies that are not very strong, housing can be this catalyst that will bring about political organizing and change. And another concept that I think is important here for context is the concept of authoritarian urbanism, which is basically kind of this idea that describes how governments can do politics by urban means, by redeveloping cities, by developing mega projects. And this is actually what happened here with Moscow and with Moscow's renovation. To go back to the earlier question that we already discussed here, that this project was there not just to improve the housing conditions of the Muscovites, not just to redevelop and make the real estate more profitable, but it was also a tool for political consolidation, for political concentration of political power. And this is a very good example of what usually is described as authoritarian urbanism. And finally, something that I also mentioned here is that I could see with this project, I could see how different scales of politics are interconnected. Again, because housing is such a specific domain, because it brings people, even private people, into contact with national, city, neighborhood politics. This example really shows you how personal is political. It is a cliche, this phrase. I'm sure you heard it so many times. But in this project, I could really see how personal became political and vice versa, how suddenly politics became part of people's very private lives, of their really everyday interactions and situations. So that's why I think it is interesting. But again, to introduce it even more, what is this? Okay. Like I said, I think it is relevant, again, not just for Russia and not just for post-socialist countries, but also for contexts where you find the situation of low political trust and maybe not very strong civic infrastructures. Again, the definition of authoritarian urbanism, even though it sounds like it's something that should be only found in authoritarian countries, this is not always the case. You can find the same tools, the same kind of political practices in other contexts. And personalist political applies everywhere. I feel like this idea that politics and private decisions are interconnected, we can find examples of this in other contexts as well. But to go back to housing, and to also introduce one of the concepts that I develop in the book and in the dissertation, I work a lot with the concept of strategy. And I mentioned that I see housing as this political catalyst, but one of the ideas that I also introduce and develop in the book is that kind of your housing related actions are often interconnected, interlocked with other types of action, including your civic strategies, what you do as a citizen. So to again go back to this general concept of strategy, I understand it. So I use the concept of life strategies a lot in the book, and this refers to all the different ways in which people pursue what they value in life. So that can it is a very broad concept, but in the book, I specifically work with housing strategies and civic strategies, and housing strategies are the ways you get the housing that you desire, the housing that you think is achievable for you. And again, I show in the book how those housing strategies are connected to what you are as a citizen, how you imagine what you as a citizen should do, are entitled to. And it includes all these ideas about civic dignity, for example. And in the book, I show how these are interconnected. Some more key concepts. I also work with the strategic interactionist perspective, and here are some concepts from that body of literature. The important ones are the concepts of players and arenas, and here I only have the arenas, which are places where players interact to generate decisions and outcomes. And what I do in the book, I basically look at where did political action happen around renovation. And what I think is also a contribution that I make in the book is not only looking at formal arenas, so all these events that were organized to discuss renovation in the city council, for example, or at the district level. But I also look at where else did this political action evolve. And I find that informal arenas, such as just playgrounds, courtyards, kitchens in private homes, waiting rooms in kind of the official offices, all of these spaces really created this political field where civic and political action evolved at the time. And I think this is also a contribution, developing the strategic interactionist perspective. I introduced this concept of urban political field, which I see as a configuration of these political interactive arenas, formal and informal, where those decisions were made, and those decisions that were consequential for the future of those neighborhoods and of Moscow. I also work a lot with the concept of gains and losses. This relates to the research on social movement outcomes or consequences. There are different words that are used to describe what is it that movements can achieve. And I have a whole chapter, which I'll focus on in a minute, on what can a movement like that do? What can grassroots movements result in? And again, this idea of multi-scalarity of urban political action. So yeah, this is basically a repetition of what I just said, the theoretical contributions, but I'll try to talk faster now because I still have a lot to go through. But before I get to some examples of what I do in the book, I feel like I need to have this obligatory methods and a sampling slide to just show you what I did and how I did this research. I mentioned that more than 100 districts were included in the proposal, but in my work, and this is a qualitative study, I focused on just 4 of them, 4 districts that were affected by renovation. And based on the results of this voting procedure, I looked at the buildings, at neighborhoods where only a few buildings voted against the proposal, where kind of many buildings managed to vote against it and were excluded from the demolition lists. So I tried to include districts with kind of different pathways or different results in my study. So I included one that was very successful in protesting, another that was one of the least successful, and something from like in between. And I did visit Moscow 3 times. So I had 3 field site visits. The first one was in 2017 when the whole renovation thing was announced and there was a lot of mobilization. But I also looked, so in the next 3 years, 2 years, how long was that? I returned and I looked at what happened after that first very intense moment of mobilization. And as I mentioned, I did it with qualitative methods, interviews, observations at the events, and also digital ethnography was actually quite important because a lot of this mobilization happened online in various messengers and social media. But this chart shows you how I approached sampling and finding my respondents or my research participants. So I was not only interested in the people who were opposed to renovation. I really wanted to include all kinds of opinions to see how the opposing opinions also affected the life in a particular apartment building, for example. The most difficult group was people without an opinion, although it's even hard to imagine that someone would not have an opinion about their building being demolished, but that was sometimes the case. Some people did not really have a strong opinion about it and just waited for their neighbors to decide. But among those who had an opinion, those were usually people with very expressed, pronounced opinions. So I tried to at least include different sides of the story in my analysis. So this is just to reiterate that the most active phase of the mobilization took place in 2017. So the project was announced in February, and in August, the lists were already finalized of those buildings that were to be included. But this is not where my research was finished. So as I mentioned, I also looked at the following couple of years, and specifically, I was interested in how this moment of mobilization, whether it had an effect on the next election cycles. And I looked at the municipal elections of 2017. Those are the district elections, and the city council elections 2 years later. And also in the book, I have a chapter where I try to see how those communities, those activist communities that were formed during the renovation mobilization, how they responded to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So this is kind of the timeline, and this is the outline of my chapters. I just wanted to show you what I have in the book. So I do kind of describe a lot what happened during the active phase of mobilization, but in what follows, I would like to focus more on the later two chapters, on the chapters dedicated to the effects on the elections. And this is chapter 6 in the book. Again, a picture you cannot probably read. But her sign says, we will respond to you at the elections. And that was really something that people, many of those who mobilized against the proposal, against this renovation plan, people learned that they actually have municipal elections. And so this is also a feature of kind of this politically apathetic, not very active political culture, if you will, that people didn't know which structures were out there for them to participate in municipal politics, to participate in urban development and urban governance. And in 2017, coincidentally, right after this active phase of mobilization, the municipal council elections took place. And when I started my research, I already saw that people were preparing for these elections because they found out that they existed, and they were often so outraged about how this whole renovation story evolved that they thought they were looking for an outlet for their emotions, and this election cycle was very conveniently placed right after the mobilization. But they also still, many of these activists remained active until the next big election, which was the city council election in 2019. And again, a picture for you. So those are two maps I feel like I have to explain. So this is, you can see the circular structure. This is Moscow. And all the district areas are the municipal districts. So the smallest kind of political unit of Moscow, and they often coincide with kind of those more informal neighborhoods. They're not exactly aligned, but often what you see on the map is kind of this lived experiential neighborhood. And on the left, you see the outcomes of the renovation vote. The redder the district, the more buildings exited the program. So this is kind of a picture showing you where the mobilization against renovation was most successful. And you can see also on the right, the map, the results of the municipal elections that same year. And kind of the less blue the area, the less support for the United Russia Party those municipal elections recorded. And you can, I hope, see, although it's not very kind of precise, I didn't run any regression analysis or anything, but just looking at the map, you can see that some of the areas that are red on the left were also not very blue on the right. And that was the result of the, in many instances, this was the result of the mobilization of the anti-renovation activists who also mobilized and participated in the municipal elections. So I could, I didn't only do this visual analysis, but I could, speaking to my research participants, I could see how they use their new energy, their new skills to participate, to influence the municipal elections. And indeed, the picture doesn't look very optimistic on the right. You can still see the dominance of the United Russia Party. This is the party of power, of course. But this was still unprecedented, that even given the degree of electoral fraud in Russia in all types of elections, some municipal councils managed to end up independent or having like a different configuration of political parties there. So what happened there? usually municipal elections, as I mentioned earlier, are very low interest, low turnout events. And this results in those councils being dominated by United Russia. So basically, when no one's looking, it's United Russia occupying those seats. But in September 2017, right after people just learned that there is a thing, that urban politics is a thing, first of all, there were quite a few new candidates from the from the pool of those anti-renovation activists who decided to run or to just stand for office. There were also more electoral observers at this level of elections that time. So again, from the pool of those anti-renovation activists, people just turned out to make sure that the elections are fair and they actually represent the vote. And there were also more voters, so the turnout was also higher than normal, than usual. And as a result, there was this shift in the configuration of the municipal councils that I showed you on the previous slide. So the way I describe it in the book is this idea that basically because of renovation, Moscow's neighborhoods started developing a district level civic infrastructure. So these people, those networks of activists who were paying attention, who knew what to do, who knew what was important. And those civic infrastructures allowed those elections to be different from the status quo. But in addition to the electoral, to kind of those electoral gains, I could also see other types of gains. Just in general, people became more interested in what happens in their city, in their buildings. And there were also people who joined to create house councils. This is the kind of the housing maintenance type of organization at the lowest level. People started mobilizing around other local issues. So I could see how after renovation, people started paying attention to the condition of their public spaces, for example, or just snow removal issues and other very local things. But as I also show here on the slide, not all results were gains. There were also some losses, and as you can imagine, people living in a building where the renovation process was very contested, neighbors basically started hating each other, and that also had an effect on how they continued after this episode was kind of has quieted down. So people were also reporting all kinds of negative emotional effects and even lost income because during those renovation months, some of them stopped working, basically. They had to concentrate on their activism. And I'll start wrapping up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is perfect timing. So this is my last slide. I wanted also to include this because this is not something I had in my dissertation. I really revised the book. Most of it is based on the dissertation, but there's this one chapter that includes other types of data. And in particular, I'm looking at how Moscow compares to other cities, because this is a very Moscow book. You have a lot of like Moscow stuff there, Moscow history, Moscow's politics. But in this last chapter, I wanted to see how it compares to other cities. And I'm using data from another project that I was involved with. And I compare Moscow to other big cities in Russia, looking at how kind of how successful urban movements can be in those different cities. And surprisingly, or not so much surprisingly, Moscow's protests are very complicated and they rarely achieve what they are setting out to achieve. So it's more difficult to protest in Moscow than in other cities. And there's also, of course, an explanation for that, because everyone's looking at Moscow. A lot of money is invested in the city, and there's also too much of kind of this fusion of political governance interests with financial interests, and it's much stronger, much more pronounced in Moscow than in other cities. But I also included kind of a vignette. This is not a real study, because basically what I did there, I looked at those digital communities that I studied for the renovation. I looked at their reaction to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and I tried to see how this global event affected Moscow's local politics. And unfortunately, what I saw is that those civic infrastructures that emerged during the renovation months, they were very fragile. They didn't really survive this shock of 2022, because many activists just left. Social media platforms were banned, and it was very difficult for people to kind of maintain them in an active situation. So on that not very positive note, I will end, and thank you for your attention. But I do hope you have questions, because I feel like I just blurted out everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Anna. Very interesting presentation, and good for sure. Here, we already circulate in the group. So, okay, so questions, comments, curiosities?
Perhaps I can
Go ahead.
call it.
But and in the virtual room, of course.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for your presentation. So nice to see you.
Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Marco Castillo. I'm from the CUNY Graduate Center as well. So we're like in the same program, and I saw that Anna was here. So
You know each other.
CUNY connections, yes.
So I've heard parts of this talk before, like in a previous phase. So it's amazing to see it here. And I just like I have many questions. Like, for instance, I'd like to know like how many of these projects actually, became buildings, and did people actually move? And also something that at the start is perhaps the negative case. You can see it in the middle part of the map. It's untouched area. I guess that's the more historical part.
Yeah, that's the city center.
Is that the reason why it's excluded from these initiatives? But then again, like the last note, the negative note, of course it's a negative note, but I think it's also interesting to learn from it, right? Like, what do you think happened with the Ukrainian invasion and the effects on organizing, on of course emotions, but there's also a structural reality about like Western consensus, anti-Russian sentiment, etc., right? And all of these global politics that of course had a response, and you talk about authoritarianism. Do you think that the level of authoritarianism and possibly internal repression played a role which may have made organizing impossibly like resilience impossible for organizing? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So was it even feasible to survive after this multi-level shock at so many instances? And is there a consolidation of authoritarianism that's unprecedented in a way that makes organizing impossible, or do you see that this can perhaps continue growing in some other moment? What are the conditions?
Yeah, that's a very big question, but I'll start.
Maybe we collect.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, as you prefer, but maybe.
Yeah, we can collect. Can I just start writing? Because,
You want to?
I have. That's okay.
Okay, so in the meantime, is someone else like Tina? No, giving you a minute
to write it down. It's okay. I can listen and write at the same time. I'm professional.
With Tina Magazzini, Czech Academy of Sciences, and a super fascinating talk. As somebody who's not familiar with context, I was wondering, it's mainly just
curiosities. But on the one hand, if you could say a few words about your positionality and what it did in the field. So if I got it right, like you went in a number of times, but at the time you were carrying out your PhD at CUNY. So I also don't know if you're from Moscow, kind of like what does that do in the responses you get, and the kind of interactions or the dynamic. And then I understand that it's not covered necessarily in the book, or at least that the main work of research was done previous to 2020. But I guess there have been a number of reforms, and particularly like the constitutional reforms of 2020 in really redimensioning local power and centralizing. And so have those kind of reforms also changed how people can act or react or organize around these issues, or is it on two different levels? Like there's a formal, and then things continue to happen on a different kind.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. Yeah.
Just to follow up on a previous question. First of all, congratulations on the book. Big achievement. I was thinking also follow up in terms of impact of the war and how probably that this comes after you finished your study, right? But I was thinking, because you say that the interest was pretty much real estate, right? To develop these projects. But I was thinking, was the impact of the war? Because on one hand, probably real estate investment fell, right? At the same time, in terms of, so what I was thinking, and I wrote war after the real estate, and now I'm struggling to understand what I wanted to say. But anyway, because what I'm thinking is, in terms of war effort, probably a lot of resources were channeled into that, right? And the other thing was, with the, now I know what I wanted to say, with all the sanctions and so on, was this mainly foreign interest, or was a Russian interest to develop these projects, and how that plays out with the mobilization dynamic?
Think you already have enough?
I'll think about how I can make a cohesive story out of all of these answers. I'll actually start with your first comment on the middle of the map, because I think it also creates an interesting, kind of highlights an interesting dimension of this process. So indeed, the middle of the map where there's no red, it's this historic city center, but that's not the only reason. So actually, and this relates to my earlier point about authoritarian urbanism, there are a few areas next to the city center that have buildings of that type that could be included, but those neighborhoods were not touched by the program because they were famous for being too oppositionist. So basically what the government, Moscow government did then, they thought, we're not going to bother with these oppositionists. They're going to create a mess, and they are going to ruin our positive electoral results that they were also going for. So they excluded those districts, but then they didn't expect what happened next with the other districts that didn't have that reputation. So there's an interesting kind of continuity here that basically having an oppositionist reputation protects you from all these types of policies a little bit. And it continued. So with those elections that I showed with the 2017 and 2019 ones, it continued. So the areas that developed this oppositionist reputation during renovation, they also build on that and created those independent councils. So I think what the story shows is that there was a possibility of Moscow eventually having a healthy kind of active urban politics with people involved. And here I'm coming to the very popular question, like what happened after the invasion? So a lot has happened, of course, and you're right that there were not not only the invasion, but even before 2022, there were initiatives, kind of political processes that were designed to limit the very kind of fragile democracy that existed at the local level. But what happened after the invasion was, in terms of the real estate development, one of the first posts on the one of the social media platforms that I kept monitoring, because the study is never over. This is something to also mention, that I still read all of that as much as I can. One of the first posts that someone made was about, now that there's war, does it mean that we won't have renovation, that they will stop it because they will just be suffocated by sanctions? But very soon after that, basically the next day or the same week, the Moscow city, the government websites and all the official media sources of the Moscow government made sure to emphasize that even though there is a war now and we need to kind of redirect our resources to support this effort, which was not, they don't use the word war to describe it. Even though all of this is happening, we will make sure that we kind of allocate some budget to support the construction sector. So that was the first thing they announced, to kind of make sure that the real estate developers are supported in this difficult time. So there was that, but of course, the sanctions and just kind of the continued war and the war age economy, they're not very conducive of housing construction and a healthy housing sector. So we'll have to see. I think the kind of those policies, they delayed the effect a little bit, but I don't think it can continue. It is very sustainable the way it is now. So I'm sure sanctions will have an effect, and they probably already have an effect, but it was delayed by these policies, by those efforts to support the sector. An interesting question about positionality. I'm not from Moscow, and I did work on a PhD in the United States. 2017 was still not as bad as 2022, of course, in terms of being not representing an enemy nation. But I did have some problems already during my field work. But I think the fact that I'm not from Moscow actually helped me because Muscovites felt like they had to explain things to me. And that was very good for my research. But I did have some issues because I couldn't interview, some people just refused to talk to me because I was a graduate student at an American university. So that happened. But I would never hide the fact that that was what I was doing, that I was working on a dissertation at an American university. So it did limit my access quite a bit, but not too badly, because it could be worse if I did my research a few years later. And it also shows you how things are really developing quickly in Russia, because 2017 now, like from our situation today, I can tell that was what they call in Russia a very vegetarian time in terms of authoritarianism and repression, even though 2017 seemed really bad compared to, say, 2011, when kind of a big democratic mobilization happened the previous time. So things were deteriorating, but they were not as bad as they are now. And it was still possible to have active and successful urban movements, as I also show in my last chapter, where I just show that it was possible to achieve something at the local level, even though at the national and at the city level, all the democratic channels were already closing down. So that was kind of the last straw, the urban movements. What else? Yeah, and other political reforms. So also the question on how this effort kind of did it merge or did it remain separate from other political efforts? At some point, it felt like this local politics, this new revitalized local politics could really give new energy to other types of protest as well. And maybe you know that, what was it, 2020 or 21, the constitution was, Russia's constitution was redesigned, and I'm pretty sure that many of those activists who were active during renovation also participated in the protests against the constitution reform, but I don't have that data. But it's just in Moscow, local politics really what used to be very merged with the national political process, just because it's this biggest city, it's the capital, and all eyes are usually on Moscow. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I also I didn't write it down well enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
More questions?
I'd like to ask one boring theoretical question.
Sure.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for your presentation. I'll be looking forward to reading your book, which, as I confessed before, I haven't done yet. But while I was looking at other research about this topic that you have published a few days ago, there was one doubt that I had, because there are, I think we can say, two major perspectives that try to explain mobilization that any social movement student has come across. And these are, on one hand, resource mobilization theory, and on the other hand, the political opportunity structure, right? So one, as you know, of course, is about organizational capacity, having a strong civil society infrastructure and resources that movements and activists can mobilize. And the other is about more so the openings, the opportunities that exist in the political system for contention. For example, when political systems that are considered authoritarian become less repressive and so on. So, but in the case of this movement that you have studied that contested the renovation program, at least in my perspective, it seems to challenge a little bit these two perspectives, right? So, as you have described in your presentation, Russian civil society is often described as being apathetic. There's a weak civil society infrastructure, and the broader political environment is generally considered unsafe, right, for citizens to contest authorities. So, to get more precise about my boring theoretical question, to what extent do you think that these classical frameworks and perspectives in social movements research are useful to study and analyze cases like this? Do they still provide useful analytical tools? Or do we need a different lens that explain how collective action emerges in a particular context like the one that you have studied? And more broadly, have you encountered other similar dynamics of mobilization in other places outside Russia?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually do hope that I do challenge those structural theories, not a bit, but quite a lot, because that's one of the main theoretical points that I'm trying to make with the book, that if we were to use just those structural, classical, traditional approaches,
Maybe no more practical.
yeah, well, I'm looking for a word there.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't be able to see what I saw. And what I saw was this development, this dynamism, the influence of culture, but also of like individual situations, of individual histories on political processes, and this nexus of personal and political. You can't really see it with those structural tools, but also you can't really see this dynamism that I described, like looking at the neighborhoods before renovation, before the mobilization, looking at them afterwards. You can basically trace how these structures, like how are they made? What are they made of? Even if we use the word structure, well, I use infrastructure, I don't use structure. which I'm sure Jim will also disagree with. But I try to use this word also to show that there is no contradiction between culture, structure, between kind of those dynamic processes and the fixed openings or institutions or what have you, but one really can create another. And this is the focus of the book. How do structures come about, or infrastructures, if you will. So definitely, I do think that the structural approaches are very limited in their explanatory power, and I hope to have made the case for a more strategic, a more cultural approach to those processes. You asked something else, whether there was a similar, whether there were similar movements
outside of Russia, similar dynamics.
Actually, quite a lot. And in my introduction in the book, I also have a historical overview of different cases of urban renewal specifically and housing related mobilizations. And surprisingly, you can often see something very similar to what I described in the book, which is neighbors opposing one another, neighbors developing new infrastructures from a situation of low social trust and low political engagement. And one of the inspirations really for my research was the urban renewal in New York City in the early 20th century and the mid 20th century, which kind of followed the same authoritarian urbanism type of political process, but also gave rise to new civic infrastructures and new kind of mobilization around urban issues. So even this classical example, you can, I think, analyze with a similar approach.
So is there time for another question?
There's Jim.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay, good, thanks. Well, like Marco, I've heard some of this before, so it's nice to catch up. I'm glad you talked about the persistence of the networks and the resilience. You didn't say how many buildings have been constructed in this project and program and what they look like. I'd be very curious what's actually going on with the renewed buildings, the renewal. Couple theoretical questions. One about the weakness of Russian civil society. I should have asked this 10 years ago, maybe, but how do you assess, how would you measure that? After all, civil society organizations are always weak compared to corporations, real estate developers, political parties, politicians, formal organizations of all sorts, government players. And as you suggest, there are parts of their districts in Moscow that apparently have a strong civil society, or at least the reputation for having strong civil society networks and so on. It's sort of like the West Village in New York. People don't really want to propose something there because they know they'll get a lot of opposition. So these places do exist. So I'm wondering how you assess where the weaker ones and the stronger ones are. Shorter question, then a longer question. When you were doing this, you found that there were different attitudes and identities toward people who had immigrated to Moscow compared to those who had been born in the city. I don't know, I forget. I think they were mostly rural Russians, not outside Russia. But did that change with the war with Ukraine? Has there been a kind of homogenization of Russian identity around the war so that these outsiders are no longer such outsiders? That's the easy question. The hard question, and I ask it not because I think you can answer it, but because I'm thinking of writing a book about blame in politics, and I've come to think of how important that is. So I was wondering if you could speculate at all or recall how each of these sides, the pro wrecking ball people and the ones who wanted to preserve their buildings, who did they blame? How did they blame? Who were the villains in the stories for that each of them, and did that matter really? But anyway, thank you. I'm very happy to be here today and to hear all of this. Think it's really it's come a long way, and it's a great project.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And just a bit of context for everyone. Jim is my dissertation supervisor. So
We lost your video, Jim. We cannot see you anymore.
Oh, I can see you.
we can see you now.
Oh,
Just to have always the three questions, there is
Yeah.
someone else. I will have a very small. Well, thank you very much for your talk and the presentation of the book. I really look forward to reading it. And you said that you were talking for a long while, but I could stay listening for much more time. It was really, it's it's a very engaging topic and a study. Just something small that to point out, maybe they are related. When you mention about when you talk about this private politics and the private is political, and I like to understand if something that you relate with some form of everyday politics, hidden forms of resistance, and this kind of things. And if you can give some example, because there are things that always interest me a lot, and it happens. And I think that these are really two interesting tools to move beyond traditional ways of looking at civil society engagement. Because, of course, if you look through macro frameworks and surveys or kind of traditional methodological or theoretical tool, sometimes you cannot detect things that actually are political. And also the way how people recognize themselves as having political agency, even in context of repression and or in a situation where they think that they cannot change anything, but there is some small action that can be recognized as political by citizens or actors in general. And also, I think that this is a little bit also the case of Portugal. Which is we have a paper with this title of mild-mannered country, but with the interrogation point, because the view of Portugal is a country with a very kind of weak civil society, also because of dictatorship, etc. But this narrative of being mild-mannered was already implemented by Salazar. So it was a kind of narrative also that was saying, well, if something bad happened, it's because it's a foreigner influence that corrupt our good citizens. But actually, if you look with other lenses, you are able really to detect many forms of politics that are not the usual ones. And maybe also this goes to this direction, of course, of contesting the models of which are already largely contested, resource mobilization structure that we all already have, let's say, criticized and in our work. But if we're looking at this everyday politics, if your idea of this private actions are connected to this view, and if you can give some example.
Thank you. So I'll just start answering those great questions. Jim's first question about new buildings. I actually don't know. I don't have the data on how many of those buildings have been constructed today. But the process is ongoing. They are actually relocating people, and they started doing that in 2017 already. So there are quite a few of those districts that have been razed to the ground and replaced with new buildings. And they look more or less like what I what I saw in 2017, which is basically like a matchbox style of a high rise without much kind of design or thought that went into it. So they are just high rises that don't look like anything from the renderings that I showed before. So that was basically just a pretty picture to pacify people, but what they're building doesn't look as nice as this picture that you've seen on one of my slides. This concept of a weak civil society, I try to put it in quotation marks because I don't really think it's a useful concept at all. And I don't use it in the book in a serious way. And in all my publications, I like to start my articles with saying that, well, you can hear it often about Russian civil society, that it's a weak one, but it's really not the case. And I agree with you there. Also, in the last chapter, where I do compare Moscow to other Russian cities, I actually make that point that it is surprising how many activist initiatives we were able to find in those large cities, and how many of them actually achieved what they were going for. So it's not that weak, but it's weak in quotation marks. Often what people mean by that is that those initiatives are not kind of sustainable over time. Like there are no long-standing activist organizations or groups that remain active after their kind of initial goal is achieved, for example. But the networks are still there, and in some cities, like my hometown of St. Petersburg, it has a very long-standing network of activists protecting historic, preserving the heritage in the city. So it's not weak at all. If you try to demolish something in St. Petersburg, these people will bite your head off, and that's not a weak activist group by any definition. So that's why I will not define what is a weak civil society. I don't think it applies here, but this is just, again, another cliche that you often hear about authoritarian states, authoritarian cities. But I think to link it again to the war, I use the word fragile rather than weak, because, and that's a better word, I think, because what we could see after the invasion is that it was really easy to destroy these connections, destroy these networks by repressing some people, imprisoning some activists, making sure that many of them just flee the country. And when you lose these people, yeah, it's really difficult to replace that infrastructure. Next question Jim asked was about how did the relationship, kind of the new arrivals to Moscow and the old arrivals, this is also a topic that I cover extensively in the book, that there was this narrative about true Muscovites wanting something and behaving in a certain way, whereas the new ones who are not the true Muscovites, not understanding it or doing things in the wrong way, supporting the renovation or opposing the renovation. And the question was whether it changed with the war. The interesting thing, and maybe an unexpected thing, is that very little changed after the invasion in many aspects of urban life in Russia in general, because after this first shock that I also documented by looking at all these digital platforms, people kind of, compartmentalize this event, and life went back to normal in a very kind of surprisingly quick way. People are not paying attention much to this because it's dangerous. It's a politically of course, risky topic, and it is suppressed from public conversations. And really, I don't think that it had that much of an effect on those dynamics. But I should add a disclaimer here that I did not research it in depth enough to be able to answer this for sure. The blame question. So surprisingly, but both sides, the pro-renovation and the anti-renovation, blamed the same forces for their misfortunes. So they blamed the new arrivals to Moscow, those new Muscovites. They blamed the government. They blamed the city council. They blamed the mayor. But they blamed them for different things. So whatever went wrong, you blame the same groups of people or the same officials. So I guess that probably aligns with your argument, Jim, that you blame the characters. You don't really care about the actual dynamics, the actual processes there. So those were the same groups, the same officials. And to Guya's question about everyday politics, I think it's a fascinating topic about kind of those acts of resistance that are not always classified as political. But to be honest, in the book, I don't have much of those. What I do talk about is mostly like very political acts, but in very apolitical, very kind of ordinary spaces, ordinary situations. Because I mentioned earlier that many of these political decisions that had political consequences were initially made in at kitchen tables. Mm-hmm. And in conversations with neighbors in really awkward places, like by a trash container or something. So these places, those situations became political. And you couldn't avoid politics in Moscow at that time, whatever you were doing. Also because even if you made a very personal, a very private decision to stand up for your civic dignity, your kind of self-respect as a citizen, you didn't want to be pushed around by the government, and you wanted to protect your property rights. What you did next, motivated by those very, very private concerns, what you did next had a political effect on, say, elections, on all kinds of things. So in that sense, I don't look at kind of how politics is part of our everyday life, but how here it became politics. Your everyday life became politics. Yeah. Did I answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have someone from the virtual.
Someone at home. Suad, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't see.
Okay, great. Maybe now I opened it. Sorry for my dark background. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. My name is Suad and I'm logging in from Berlin. I actually come in from very different discipline. It's global health, but interest taking spaces. So I just have three questions. One of them is directly related to your book, and other is more, I would say, expand a bit beyond that. So the first question is, I just wonder if you had any communication around the book back to the community and the neighborhood you worked with. I think that would be really interesting to know. And if yes, how was the perception, or if that's maybe planned or not? The other question is that I noticed you mentioned your very specific interest in the concept of strategy, which is also present in your upcoming project on strategic care. That is, in you. So I wonder, what is really the origin of your choice interest of this terminology that you really find kind of relevant across project or across topics? I mean, because, for example, I come from global health, and I think strategy as a concept can have a bit of hierarchical implication in terms of scale of application and level of its development. And how does that then speak to, kind of participation or participants who, who are part of the process, and do they really relate to these terminologies? And then my last question is, I don't know, and I haven't read your book, but listening to you, actually, I got reminded by a book I read before called The Future of Nostalgia by Svetlana Boym. So I don't know if you know, if anyone knows it. She kind of investigate ruin sites and construction sites in post-communist cities. And of course, I know here, she worked more on, as I said, ruins and memorial places and so on. But I just wonder, and that's of course different from the housing urban space, can be extremely more personal. I just wonder if, from your perspective, if there exists any kind of discourse intersection between those two levels of renovation processes and practices and their accompanied movements, meaning like between urban housing level reconstruction and renovation sites that are on a city level that is basically part of a historical context in the end. So that is my question. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I just noticed my camera is always off and on, so apologies for that.
Think a lot. And I think we have still one quick question.
Yeah. So it's very quick. So just a quick contribution on this question of, or debate on, weakness of civil society. And I was thinking of another distinction that might be useful instead of weak versus strong. It's heteronymous versus autonomous, which is Gramscian inspired, and it was a paper that was written by Dylan Riley at the American Journal of Sociology. And instead of thinking of weak versus strong, which they use as well, but they combine it with heteronymous versus autonomous. And I think in your case, it's very interesting because this has to do with the relation between civil society and the state. And so but anyway, and so what I think it's interesting is that, for what I understand, you have very heteronymous, a lot of heteronomy in Russia because the state sponsors a lot of movements and gets involved, right? But here what you have is actually autonomy, right? These people don't really, have any connection with the state and are actually opposing it. So it might be a distinction that it's useful for you in the future if you want to think beyond weak versus strong, which I think this one that I'm saying is much more interesting.
Thank you. I'll just take that, but I'll start from Tiago's comment, because I think I just want to make this point again. I'm not working with the concept of weak civil society, because this is just my way of challenging the existing cliches, which I don't agree with. And what I'm really not interested in whether they're weak or strong or whatever. I'm interested in seeing how they develop over time and the dynamics, whether there's any way that this can build up to something new, something different from what existed before, right? And that's what I really am fascinated by, looking at how these things develop, how from a very private, everyday situation can grow something consequential and something with really political repercussions across the country. But yeah, good to know that there are different ways of talking about it. And now I'll get to the comments from our online speaker. Whether there was any communication about the book to the participants. No, because the book was published in 2026, and I don't see a safe way to communicate about the book with the people who participated in my study. But even before this book was published, I tried to publicize the results of the study as much as I could. And I did publish in Russian also because like I should stress this, that most of my academic publications are in English, and this is not very relevant for my research participants in Moscow, many of whom do not read academic publications of in whatever language. But I did write more popular texts and articles in the media that were more accessible to my research participants, and also they were discussed in some of these social media platforms. So in a way, I did try to communicate the results to the research participants, even though not the book and not my academic articles. It's an interesting question about strategy, because I think I took quite some liberties with the concept of strategy and with how even strategic interactionism defines strategy when it's applied to social movements in the book, because I really stretched it and I tried to include kind of create an inclusive concept that would allow me to talk about social movement strategy, but also like personal agency. And maybe this is the word that you hear more often when applied to people, to individuals making decisions about their lives. But I did see the potential there in applying the concept of strategy, this kind of organized action to achieve various goals, to see how personal strategy can align, become part of, enrich collective strategies, and how these things are connected. And that's what I'm really like playing with in this book, in this project. So just to maybe clarify that strategy here in the book is really a concept inspired by cultural sociology. So it is not a narrow definition of strategy where you have like a purposive, very articulated action organized to achieve very articulated goals. That in this case, strategy includes habitual things, cultural kind of culturally preferred ways of organizing action. So it's a more inclusive concept that comes very close to agency, but agency to me is a bit too vague. And in this way of phrasing it, I think strategy gives a bit more room to be precise, but also inclusive. So that's, I hope that answers the question on strategy. But I didn't really understand your last question on Svetlana Boym and her work. Maybe you could clarify this if you're still there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm here. I mean, I know that Svetlana Boym it was really on a quite different level, and it was more on different post-communist cities, including Moscow, analyzing the sites of reconstructions and so on, which are part of also historical context. So my question was, so for working with these with your project, which is, I mean, in the end, also these houses, they were also part of a historical context, right? So I just wonder if there is any kind of, you think, any kind of intersection between those two levels of reconstruction, not just as a processes, but also as accompanied movement, the movement that accompanied them by, because there were also movement, I mean, against or with regarding reconstruction side, whether in Moscow or even in Berlin, right? I mean, so I'm just trying to kind of collect these different levels of renovation movements, whether on a city memorial common space, but also on a very personal level as people's homes and site of living. So I don't know, does that clarify?
Well, I think so, but I'll try to answer, and you tell me if this is an answer you were after. I don't know this particular book by Svetlana Boym that you referred to, but this historical dimension is definitely there in renovation. In one of my chapters, I do talk about Moscow and the past of Moscow, the past of kind of the history of housing in Moscow that also influenced how this protest, how this policy was perceived, and how this protest evolved. So there's this definitely a very important historical dimension to it. And maybe also coming closer to coming even closer to answering your question, some activists do perceive this housing stock, this Soviet era housing stock, as part of the legacy, as part of the architectural legacy even. And there was an attempt to also present those buildings as having value in that sense, but it wasn't very well accepted, not very popular among Muscovites themselves, because it is, I think, too early and too much of a stretch for people to see those really ordinary buildings as something that has a historical value. But there was even an attempt to document all the buildings that might have potentially some historical architectural value. And there was an exhibition in Moscow also as part of this anti-renovation effort. But to wrap this up, I do think that history and the past and how it's perceived definitely played a big role in this movement, in this resistance to renovation, but also in just kind of informing how people imagined Moscow, how they imagined what is good housing. There was a lot of influence from these previous periods of Moscow's history. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I was not looking for a specific answer, but I think I can relate a lot to, I mean, from your answer to my question. So thanks. Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
May I make a suggestion? Apropos of this? I don't know how much time, I don't want to take too much, but it seems to me with Suad's question, you don't want to link discursive themes and social movements together too tightly, because a social movement can draw on a variety of cultural meanings, cultural themes, including nostalgic ones, sort of at will. I mean, there may be a movement that's just about a memorialization and so on, but otherwise the nostalgic themes pop up in all sorts of social movements as they rhetorically try to find persuasive pieces of meaning. So if your question seemed to be maybe linking those two a little too tightly. If I could also say something about strategy, one of the problems with using the word strategy is, of course, you think of military and business strategies as these plans, these very reified things, which are, they have rhetorical purposes that are exaggerated, and we don't really want to accept that as sociologists. I always kind of prefer to use the adjective strategic, which kind of gets us away from reifying the strategies. And it links it to Habermas and strategic action as opposed to communicative action and instrumental action and so on. So there are there's strategic aspects rather than it being a strategy, if that helps. So with the language a little bit, apropos of the other question.
Yeah, thanks. I find that really interesting, the differentiation between as an adjective or as a noun itself. Yeah.
Well, okay, before concluding, I'd like to just understand something more about this, about the topic of strategies, because what we see in other kind of movements like solidarity movements or housing movements but the movements that care for right to housing, so they support people in a housing crisis, etc. In this context, the strategies or the strategic actions are also connected to their values. So the strategy is also a message. And this is very interesting. So it's not that the strategy is the most effective way to achieve a goal, but should be also consistent with the values of the group. And so, of course, for instance, the strategy you use to organize, not just to achieve things, but also how to
discuss, how to. And so I don't know if there is something similar of just the strategical decision about strategies that will take into account values, or it's more just like effectiveness or.
Yeah, in the book, I actually distinguish between different kind of definitions of what a strategy is. And I even have this concept of habitual strategies. Those that are not even articulated, that people cannot really explain why they're acting in a particular way, why they're making specific decisions, but they still do it because they've been like socialized into a particular culture, or like they just learned that this is the right way to do things, and this is what we need to. Those are the kind of good goals that we need to aspire for. And I distinguish between articulated strategies, the ones that you can actually pronounce and explain other people why you're doing things a certain way, and those habitual strategies that do inform. And I do use the word strategy actually as a noun and not as an adjective, because I think it kind of it helps highlight that we do learn or develop those unspoken rules by which we play and make decisions. And it does inform political action quite a bit. So those habitual unarticulated strategies did come into play quite a bit.
Okay. Well, thank you. A lot of questions, a lot of very nice and interesting insights. So maybe we can finish here. And thank you so much, Anna. It was great to have you here. It is great to have you here. And thank you very much for joining us in the virtual room. It would be nice to be all together in the same room, but still better than not be together at all. And thank you, ciao, Jim.
Yeah,
Ciao, everyone.
thanks everyone, online and offline.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.